As my students know all too well, I'm hip to what the kids like. And what the kids like, judging from my students, is writing songs. Many of my composition students started out as singer-songwriters, and many of them continue to write songs to this day. So what is the singer-songwriter's secret to writing chord progressions? Use as few chords as possible. And accepted wisdom says that the fewest chords you can get by with is 3. If you don't believe me about singer-songwriters using only 3 chords, take a look at this Google search. There are over 49 million results. This is something that lots of people are interested in. It's also purported to be the harmonic method behind the songs the kids like Margaritaville and Wild Thing. This method was explained in the book, The Art of Strict Composition in Music by Johann Kernberger. Kernberger explained, "It can be seen that to every purely diatonic melody, it's possible to add a bass that consists of nothing but triads built on the tonic, dominant, and subdominant. Therefore, this is the first and simplest type of harmonic bass." Here's an example of this kind of harmonization in a Beethoven dance movement. Here's a more recent example, a 12-bar blues. In addition to being a compositional method that composers actually use, it is in a simplistic way the basis of Percy Getch's American functional harmony. The 3 chords used are tonic, dominant, and subdominant, just like the 3 principal chords in Getch's theory. I suspect that this 3-chord style of harmonization came into classical music from German folk music. Johann Kernberger hinted at this when he wrote, "I must note in addition that this type of writing, where only the 3 basic chords mentioned are used without ever digressing to other keys, is the most elementary type of composition and is suitable only for the most common listener, whose ear is incapable of grasping anything more complex. In this category belong all kinds of musettes, peasant songs, and street songs. Marches of this type can also be found occasionally." Note that the Beethoven dance I used is a Lindler, a simple German folk dance. The problem with this 3-chord method is that it can become boring very quickly. But what if you like this sound? What if you like the bright sound of major chords in a major key? Well, you're stuck with the chords tonic, dominant, and subdominant because they're the only major chords in the major mode. Unless, that is, you're willing to change keys. If you're willing to change keys, you can have your chords in your variety too, by using major chords from a variety of keys. This very strategy may explain the myriad of modulations and secondary dominants found in classical music. Take a look at another Beethoven dance. It's from the same collection as the dance we examined earlier. It contains secondary dominants in the middle section. They are dominants, but in the key of the subdominant. These are still bright-sounding chords, so they belong to the same harmonic style as the chords in the previous dance, yet they lend the piece more variety. When we talk about chord function, we make it clear that chords need to go to certain other chords. Tonic is the goal. Dominant leads to tonic, subdominant leads to dominant. The problem is that in major keys all these chords sound alike. They are all major chords. So how do you tell one chord from another? I play a stupid game with my music theory students. I play a major chord on the piano and I ask, what's the chord's function? Assign it a Roman numeral. Whatever answer they give, I tell them they're wrong. I play the chord again, and I tell them they're wrong. In major keys, there are only three answers: tonic, dominant, and subdominant. And by the time somebody's guessed all of those, it's obvious what I'm doing. I'm defining the chords in terms of context, in terms of keys. And I'm not telling the students what that context is. So no matter what they guess, they're always wrong, because unbeknownst to them, I'm changing the context. The idea that chords have different functions depending upon their context was expressed by Gottfried Weber in his book, The Theory of Musical Composition. He called this phenomenon the multiple meanings of chords. Making use of these multiple meanings, composers could add variety to works through modulations and secondary dominants. Just in case his readers couldn't remember the various meanings of the chords in various keys, Weber included a nifty chart of so-called tonettes. The multiple meaning of chords allows composers to do more than just add variety to their music. It allows them to create large-scale structures. It gives them a way to define form. An example of this in the Kernberger book shows us how this might be done. The example begins in C major, and then moves to G major, then A minor, then D minor, then E minor, F major, and finally back to C major. These keys are fairly closely related. Much of the root movement in the example is by descending fifth. Kernberger uses different note values in the example. I assume that these refer to the relative importance of those chords and to the length of time spent on those chords or keys. He uses double whole notes, brevs, to refer to key areas. Half notes refer to less important notes, and noteheads without stems refer to chords that lead into other chords. These leading chords are all dominants. Most of them have chromatics, new leading tones that lead into the next chord. So Kernberger's concept of harmony is that it's based on strong root movement by descending fifth, and that this movement is independent of the key of the piece. By this I mean that the piece will modulate often, and it will. There remains the question of how this harmonic plan is accomplished. While all of Kernberger's modulations are conventional, the important key areas do not all relate to one another by descending fifth. For example, the second key area G doesn't progress down a fifth to C, but to A minor instead. A minor is, of course, the relative minor of C major, so maybe Kernberger's thinking of it as a kind of a substitute for C major. This is probably not the case for D minor progressing to E minor, or E minor progressing to F major, or even F major moving to C major at the end. There's been a lot of ink spilled in music theory books emphasizing the dominant to tonic relationship. Kernberger was interested in this relationship, but he didn't seem particularly interested in dominance over the long term. The final chord in his scheme is approached from a brief dominant chord right before the end, but the main key area before that final tonic is subdominant, not dominant. The reason why this may be important is that it contradicts a number of approaches to music theory, including Schenkerian analysis, which stresses the dominant-tonic relationship. Some music theorists have suggested that Kernberger's scheme is a kind of a sonata form. I can see that at the beginning, but not in the middle or at the end. A typical sonata form has a lot more emphasis on dominant than does Kernberger's example. A contrasting harmonic plan can be found in another 18th century source, C.P.E. Bach's True Art of Keyboard Playing. C.P.E. Bach's example contains modulations to keys that are not closely related. Take a look at this one, which goes from A major to F major. It does this through a 5-7 in A, which leads to a 5-7 in F. The second chord is moved into with a kind of chromatic slide. The B in the first chord slides down to a B flat, the D sharp slides up to an E. C.P.E. Bach does the same kind of thing in his actual concert works. Here's an excerpt from a rondo for keyboard. This music modulates all over the place. The first two measures repeat, shifted up a step, and then shifted up a step again. I would probably call this a sequential modulation, because the music is simply repeating at different pitch levels, creating a sequence. Some music theorists think it's important to have a common chord, a pivot, at the point where keys change. This chord has multiple meanings at the same time. It functions one way in the old key and a different way in the new one. Music theorist Walter Piston expressed this idea when he wrote, "Sometimes one feels that the composer did not intend an overlapping transition between the two keys, but there can be no modulation in which the last chord of the first key cannot be analyzed in terms of the second key, as a pivot chord." Notice, however, that there is no overlapping chord between the end of measure 2 and the first chord in the new key at the start of measure 3. Since the chord in the first key contains an F natural not found in the second key, and the chord in the second key contains a V natural not found in the first key, I disagree with Piston's point. This seems like a direct, abrupt modulation to me. A sequential passage at the end of the page has chords moving down by perfect fifth, until the music lands on an E major chord, a 5 in A minor. This chord continues at the start of the next page, expressed as an ascending minor scale. Bach adds a D sharp in the second measure to create a kind of 7 of 5. An A flat is introduced at the fermata. This one note completely changes the meaning of the chord. While before there was a diminished chord, D sharp, F sharp, A, C, it now becomes a major chord, A flat, C, E flat. This major chord leads inharmonically to a new key, C sharp major, because the A flat chord, inharmonically respelled, is a 5 in the key of C sharp. This is a very dramatic and unexpected modulation. The piece continues in C sharp for a while before reverting to modulations in quick succession. Kernberger and C.P.E. Bach seem to be using modulation for different purposes. Kernberger's using it in order to add variety to a sequence of chords. He's also using it in order to structure a piece. This is an important application of modulation. Many music theorists would say this is the primary function of modulation. Take a look at this Sousa march. The work is a large binary. The second half of the binary modulates down a fifth from the first half. Students in high school bands across America learn that they need to watch out for the key change that happens in the middle of the march, because at the start of this second section, the trio, the composer will always add a flat. With no instruction and analysis, the students are all aware of the two large formal divisions, and they are aware of the dividing line, all because of the modulation. C.P.E. Bach, on the other hand, seems to be using modulation primarily for effect, to supply drama. In music theory class, we tend to talk about smooth modulations using pivot chords. In real life, modulations are often abrupt, unexpected, dramatic. So modulation can be used to divide a piece into parts and thereby give it structure, or it can be used to make a piece more dramatic. Dramatic harmonic effects can be created in other ways. We'll talk about that next time.